This episode of Manage Smarter is brought to you by Sales Fuel Sales Manager Training. Based on the Sales Manager's Guide to Greatness, it's a 36-lesson on-demand program to upskill your sales manager so they can execute your vision and drive consistent revenue growth. Watch a free lesson and find out more at salesfuel.com/SMT. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
You know, Lee, when you get uncomfortable about something, you tend to want to make it comfortable and run away from, feelings of discomfort, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right. However, with COVID-19, it's one thing that we've learned. You have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. For
the long term in a many more different ways. And so our expert today is not only going to talk about how discomfort, he believes, is the only thing that really leads to growth, but also how to coach to it for your team. Make your team uncomfortable and make them grow. Sounds like it's simple, but I think it's way more complex than that.
Well, I'm sure there's lots of nuance, and we're about to find out what that is.
That's right. Welcome to Manage Smarter, everyone. I'm Audrey Strong. I'm the Vice President of Communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith, the President and CEO of Sales Fuel.
Bill Eckstrom is on deck, the founder and CEO of the EcSell Institute, the world's first and only organization to measure and quantify leadership effectiveness. Considered one of the world's top authorities in metric-based performance coaching and growth. He's got a book, Lee. It's called The Coaching Effect, and it's also co-authored by EcSell Institute President Sarah Wirth, helping leaders at all levels understand the necessity of challenging people out of their comfort zone to create high-growth organizations. I watched this TED Talk. Everybody, you can see it on YouTube. It's called Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life. He's a keynote speaker, presents to hundreds of groups, and we're very lucky to have him on the podcast. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, Audrey. How are you?
Good. So your discomfort started when you got called into the C-suite and got fired on the spot. And that is what all this came out of, right?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing up one of the most humiliating events in my life.
Oh, yeah.
Way to make him feel uncomfortable, Audrey.
I'm trying to make you grow. Come on.
It's interesting that you start off with that, because I wasn't. The TED Talk, Audrey and Lee, was not supposed to start that way. And I was actually had a different opening created for the TED Talk. I was bringing it to our team. So we're sitting around our conference table. This literally happened. And I was walking through that opening, and Will, our VP of sales, looked up to me, and he just said, very matter-of-factly, he said, "Bill, why don't you just tell the truth?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what you're talking about." And he goes, "Tell the truth." I said, What do you mean tell the truth?" He said, "Why don't you tell everybody that the only reason we have jobs, the only reason we're able to work together, the reason we're able to sit around this conference table right now is because you got fired from your job 10 years ago." And everybody, all the balance of our team was kind of sitting around, and they kind of nodded at each other, like not sensing, my sarcasm, but they're like, "Yeah, that's a great idea." So anyway, I realized at that moment that I was about to give a TED Talk on the need to be in discomfort or seek it or embrace it to grow. And I was afraid to go there myself. So the opening of the TED Talk changed to the story of one of my more uncomfortable events, getting fired, and the rest is kind of history.
No, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I love that it started that way. I thought it was very brave, and it really kind of, had me leaning in, like, well, tell me more.
Thank you.
So a lot of people, though, will hear is like, I don't like I try to do everything I can to make my staff feel comfortable and feel safe and, love to come to work and everything like that. And what you're suggesting seems contrary to that, but is it?
Well, it's interesting. So you use the word comfortable. What I tell people, what our organization tells people, and what we talk about in the book, The Coaching Effect, is we have to go to productive, not comfortable, but productive. And what creates productivity, but more importantly, what creates consistent growth of productivity? And that is, there has to be discomfort involved in both psychologically, physiologically, biologically. It's got to be there in order for things to grow. So it's not just a work thing, but it is a world thing, actually.
And there's a lot of truth to that, because I think the most comfortable moments, and I say moments, I'm talking about even sometimes months, is where I learned the most and grew the most as a leader. And, I certainly wouldn't, erase that, because I would have to lose the knowledge of what I learned. But at the same point in time, I don't want to go through it again.
Right. But that's an interesting point, Lee. And that's what we hear from a lot of leaders. When we ask them to reflect on their lives and the times they grew the most, there were always periods of challenging times. Nobody said, yeah, I really grew a ton when I had nothing to do and I just kind of sat around and cruised for a while. Nobody ever talks about that.
That's right. The magic happens outside the comfort zone.
That's right.
Well, I was going to ask the question about, how is this different though? Let's say I'm good at my job, and this concept of discomfort leading to learning. How do you delineate that from, say, professional development overall?
Well, first of all, let me back up. I think everything begins with learning something, and then learning converted to strategy to action. It's what am I learning? And not only what I learn, it's what am I willing to then do with it? And so often when we learn something, we only apply the things that really make us comfortable, that we're comfortable doing.
Okay.
And, one of the things, and I'm sure you see it too, I mean, how many times do you train salespeople a better method that if they follow, they will sell more stuff, but they don't do it because it's different than what they're currently doing? And it's interesting. So really what creates discomfort is the unknown. It's the unpredictable. That's what creates discomfort in our lives. And
that's true.
And what creates comfort is the opposite of that. So it's predictability. And you see it in salespeople all the time. So if you follow A, B, and C, D will be an end result, and that'll be a better result than what you're doing now. Well, that would require me to change the way I think and to change the way I behave, and I'm not willing to do that.
But also in sales, we're also taught to reduce risk for the buyer. And so there's certain inherent risk involved because of the uncertainty. So as a manager, what can we do to reduce that risk?
Okay, so ask that question again, Lee.
All right. So in sales, we're taught to reduce risk with the buyer. In this case, then the coachee is the buyer, because there is inherent risk because of the uncertainty of following a new methodology, procedure, something like that. So as managers, how can we sell them by reducing risk?
Well, I think that's a really good question, by the way, and you're making me think about that. Again, I'm going to get back into starts to learning. When one of the things that we've seen with our client organizations is when they understand, for example, the growth rings that I talked about in the TED Talk, and that we explain even further in our book. When they understand how that works, there's a tendency to go, oh, I see what you're doing. I see where this goes. I am really, it's not that I don't think this will work, it's that it's making me uncomfortable. And most of the times our response to this discomfort is subconscious. There's a visceral aversion to it. And that's what people have to overcome. And the first way to overcome it is to really understand how it works. Did that answer your question, Lee?
Well, let's dive into that a little bit. So talk a little bit about the growth rings and how does that work?
Well, the growth rings depict environments that exist around us all the time that either promote or hinder growth. And the environments at both extreme ends, one would be stagnation, which is negative growth. Another is chaos, which a lot of organizations and people, quite frankly, are feeling today with the pandemic. Neither of those are healthy places to be. Chaos is having no control over inputs or outcomes. But then you have two other environments in the middle, one being order. And order is knowing that what you do or what happens in your environment leads to a predictable outcome. But it's the predictability that creates comfort. And therefore, it's comfort that makes order so dangerous, because growth only occurs in a state of discomfort. And discomfort occurs when you can understand inputs, but they're different, and outcomes will be different. We call that environment a complex environment, not complex in the sense of complicatedness as much as it's the name of an environment where inputs have changed and outcomes will be different. And there we go. When outcomes are different, that means they're unpredictable, and it's unpredictability that creates discomfort. That's where people are afraid to be, but it's the only environment where growth occurs.
So it's sort of like that definition of insanity.
Right, exactly.
So what are some tangible ways to create that environment of discomfort for your teams or whoever you're mentoring as a leader? I know an example that I'll give that I report to Lee in our company, is when he tasks me to go learn some new process or way of doing things, or even just a whole new task that's assigned to me, and it makes me deeply uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I'll sometimes say to you, Lee, and I'll cop to this, do we really need, do I have to, and you do not let me off the hook. You're like, figure it out. That's it. Like, when I go off, and I'm always grateful for that actually in the end. So other than not letting people off the hook, what new processes or new sales goals, what are some of the other ways to force people into that zone?
That's a great question, Audrey. And you described, quite frankly, one of them that so many leaders, coaches are afraid to do, which is, to use your words on Lee, figure it out. In other words, I think often as leaders and coaches, we tend to view ourselves as problem fixers. We remove obstacles for people. If I've heard it once from leaders in sales, I've heard it hundreds of times, which is, my role as a leader or a coach for my people is to remove obstacles. It's not. Your role is to help your people understand how to remove obstacles.
That's right.
It's not to do it for them. Now, so before we really dive into answering that question, let me back up for a second, because one of the things that gets left out, and I realized this because I tagged that in the TED Talk several years ago, which was growth only occurs in a state of discomfort, and that everybody just jumps on that and they're enamored with it. But here's the reality. While as it applies to coaching and leadership, if you don't first have a trust-based relationship with people, and you try and create discomfort on their behalf to create growth, which is good, but if you don't have the relationship first, you're a jerk. That's what we see in our research.
Yeah.
It's true.
So obviously,
Yeah.
Lee is effective at doing things like that with you because you trust Lee, and Lee knows you, Lee understands you, and without that in place, you just view Lee as kind of a jerk. It would be, well, you're doing it for your benefit, Lee, or for the company's benefit. But if you don't know my goals, my objectives, and you can't tie all this together for me, why this is going to help me, then it just doesn't make sense.
It goes both ways too, because Audrey has to trust me. I have to trust her. But it's like, and I've been in coaching relationships where the coachee, it was difficult for them to trust. And so what happens is, you're being mean, you're a jerk, whatever. And it's like, and no matter how you try to phrase things or whatever, it's like, it's difficult. So it's like, I know exactly what you're saying there. And one of the other things that makes me think about it is like, how do you coach somebody or get somebody in a coaching, in a mindset then to be able to receive coaching and really dive into it, when they don't think that they have anything that they need to improve on, or they don't think that you as the coach, have anything of value to provide to them?
Great question, Lee. And first of all, let me start off by saying, I don't believe that everybody is coachable.
I agree.
And usually what we're seeing when we see circumstances that you're describing is with A players. Now, what's interesting is we have a tendency, especially in sales departments where we spend a lot of our time, but it applies to A players within any department. We see a tendency to leave those people alone.
Uh-huh.
And that's really one of the worst things you could do is A players want to grow and develop no less, if arguably
Not
more
Mm-hmm.
than what other people do. They just don't want to be perceived as having it done the same way. So treat me uniquely, treat me differently. And then, so to answer your question then specifically, if somebody doesn't seem to be valuing the coaching you're providing, the first thing to do is to look in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And because, what am I doing or not doing to not create value or discretionary effort on this person's behalf? But what our research would show then after that is everything begins with trust relationships. Then you've got to have the right order, processes, systems in place. And then you are set up to be able to challenge people uniquely and individually to get them out of their comfort zones to grow more. But it does begin with relationship. And that then, of course, leads to, well, what creates a relationship? Well, what we've seen in our research is, first and foremost, it's providing objective feedback, written feedback, then doing consistent one-to-one meetings, doing career development plans with people, and then having wonderful, healthy, consistent team meetings are what we call the 4 high-growth activities that leaders do consistently and do well.
Do you recommend that you ask a lot of questions for discovery when you're leading into coaching as a way to get to that place of complexity?
Yes, Audrey, you just said it. Coaching too often people perceive it as telling, as, well, I'm a coach. I'm the master of wisdom in terms of this profession. And I'm going to now impart my wisdom upon all the people that are on my team, and
they shall be grateful.
Exactly. Right. And which is ridiculous. It is about questions. Questions. It's no different in coaching than it is in sales. The most powerful thing you can do as a coach is to ask great questions, not be able to have great responses.
And it's also true in sales.
Exactly. And it's really unique. Our director of research calls it the management paradox. In sales, you go from asking questions to learn and you solve problems and da-da-da-da-da. And then all of a sudden, when you go into a management role, you start telling.
Yeah,
it's really weird. Yeah.
We've got a few minutes left. It's excellinstitute.com, everybody, but it's EcSell, so Excel, no X in there.
Yeah.
Same thing on Twitter. Yeah. And then your LinkedIn is also EcSell-Institute and Bill Eckstrom. Bill, you want to talk about what, your consulting? I mean, obviously you're probably not traveling around doing speeches right now. Are you doing online presentations or? That's been a fun and interesting and uncomfortable yet growth-filled switch. I've learned. As a matter of fact, I'm right in front of me right now. I've got an external camera. I've got 3 computer monitors up. I got a directional microphone, and I've begun to do a lot of work online, both with our clients as well as just keynote speeches, which is surprising and fun to do. But yes, it's excellinstitute.com. And what we do is we help organizations, we quantify their coaching leadership effectiveness, and we measure the impact it has on the teams that report to them. And then we help them learn how to create that discretionary effort, which is the role as a coach or as a leader within their organizations.
Can you sum up real quickly how you do that?
Yes, Lee, thank you. It's a 4-step process. The first thing we do is measure. So we come into organizations and we, through what we call the coaching effect survey, we ask people to really measure the relationship between a coach and the people on their respective team. So we create a baseline from that. Everybody actually gets a score. And we're measuring these key areas that our researchers showed us are critical to growth. So that's number 1 is measure. Number 2 is educate and develop. So that is understanding what is it that I do or don't do? What are the behaviors? What are the greatest coaches doing to create the most discretionary effort? So there's a lot of education and development in terms of those 4 high growth activities. And so there's kind of a coaching quantity and quality component to that. The third step is around implementation. Sometimes organizations do it themselves, sometimes they use us, but it's monthly huddles. It's taking what you learned and making sure that it is getting applied to the people in your team, as well as your, obviously your own behaviors. And then the last step is to track and analyze. And we've developed a coaching cloud software that allows us to do that. So it's really taking all what you do and what you say and quantifying it, tying it back to growth. And as a result of doing all that, we're able to measure what impact they're having on their teams from a dollar and cents standpoint.
It's fascinating. This is great stuff. I love all these concepts. And Bill, we're so glad you came on the show. It's really great food for thought. And I have a feeling we're going to hang up and Lee's going to say, go learn quantum physics and come back to me with a 50-page report.
There's no 50-page reports.
There's
okay.
I've got some good YouTube videos you can watch on quantum physics. It's much easier, Audrey. Much easier.
Yeah.
You won't know it. You won't know the difference.
Well, it's a pleasure meeting you, Bill. Thanks for joining us in the pandemic. It's great stuff.
Audrey and Lee, thank you very much. It's an honor to be with you both.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.